Hey, welcome to Agnes Thompson's channel. My name's Evelyn, and I'm going to share my story with you.
At 68, you learn to appreciate rituals. Not the grand milestones of life, but the small, quiet anchors that keep your day steady. For me, that anchor was the morning. At 7 a.m., not a minute later, I would come down to the kitchen of our home in the suburbs of Charlotte, North Carolina, and start the coffee. The aroma of Arabica was the first brushstroke on the canvas of a new day. The second was Richard. He would appear exactly 7 minutes later, the precise time the French press needed to work its magic, kiss the top of my head, and say the same thing every time. "Good morning, my incomparable Evelyn." We had been married for 12 years. It was a second marriage for both of us, and we had found in each other a quiet, comfortable happiness, the kind they don't write novels about because it lacks drama. Richard was a retired civil engineer, a man as solid and dependable as the foundations he used to design. I had spent my entire career as a corporate archivist for Bank of America. My job was to create systems that ensured not a single important document, not a single figure, was lost in the chaos of mergers and acquisitions. I was obsessed with order, with backups, with the logic of data storage. Richard affectionately called it my professional paranoia. "You're the only person on the planet who has a backup of her grocery list," he'd joke, watching me photograph my notepad before heading to the store. "A backup isn't paranoia, darling. It's insurance against entropy," I'd reply, and he would laugh. I was the one who insisted we digitize everything: old photographs, birth certificates, 30 years of tax returns. Everything was meticulously scanned, renamed according to a strict year-month-day_description system, and uploaded to a secure cloud storage, the password for which was in a safe deposit box and in a sealed envelope with our lawyer. Richard would grumble, but he complied. He trusted my system. That morning, in early April, the air was filled with the scent of blooming azaleas. We were sitting on the porch, drinking coffee and discussing our upcoming trip to Italy. It was Richard's dream to drive through Tuscany, stopping at small, family-run hotels. "All the tickets are bought, hotels are booked," I said, making a note on my tablet. "I've also mapped out all the consulates and hospitals along our route, just in case." Richard smiled and covered my hand with his. His palm was warm and broad. "Evie, sometimes you just need to relax and let things happen." "Order is my relaxation," I countered. "Speaking of order, did you send Mr. Davis the final version of the will?" A couple of weeks prior, we had made the final amendments. Nothing major, mostly clarifications on charitable donations and a few personal items for his children from his first marriage, Mark and Jessica. The core of it remained unchanged. The house and the bulk of our savings would go to me, so I could live comfortably without financial worry. A portion of the assets was designated for his children, and a trust was established for the long-term care of his younger sister, who had a disability. It was all fair and had been discussed many times. "Sent it yesterday," Richard nodded. "And, just as you taught me, I CC'd you on the email. With the notarized PDF. The subject line is, 'Final version,' the only one that matters. Just so my little archivist can rest easy." He winked at me, and I felt a surge of affection. He understood me. He accepted my need for control and even played along with it. In that moment, I was perfectly happy. I didn't know it was our last morning together. It happened after lunch. He was in the garden, pruning the roses. I was in his office, sorting through bills. First, I heard a dull thud. It was soft, almost unnoticeable. I would have ignored it if it hadn't been followed by an absolute, unnatural silence. The clipping of the shears had stopped, as had his quiet humming. My heart skipped a beat. I rushed to the window. He was lying on the grass next to a tea rose bush, face down. The next few hours blurred into a single, nightmarish fog. The 911 call, my voice cracking. The sirens. The uniformed people filling my home, their movements calm and practiced. The ride to the hospital, the white corridors, the smell of antiseptic. The doctor's words, sounding as if they were coming from underwater. "Massive heart attack. We did everything we could." "I'm so sorry." My world collapsed. My anchor was gone, and I was adrift in a boundless ocean of grief. I sat on a plastic chair in the hospital hallway, the only reality being a chill that pierced me to the bone, despite the warm weather outside. My system, my order, my insurance against entropy, all of it was useless against the brute force of a random, unforgiving event. Mark and Jessica flew in the next day. Their arrival felt like a lifeline. I was so shattered I couldn't handle the simplest tasks. The thought of arranging a funeral, calling people, choosing a casket, it all seemed impossible. Jessica hugged me at the door, and this time, her embrace felt sincere and warm. She held me at arm's length, looked into my eyes, and said softly, "Evelyn, we're here. We'll take care of everything. You are not alone." And I believed her. They moved with surprising efficiency. Mark, with his business-like approach, immediately took over the phone calls. He spoke with the funeral home, the bank, and their father's lawyer, Mr. Davis, I assumed. His voice on the phone was confident and calm, solving problems that seemed insurmountable to me. Jessica, meanwhile, enveloped me in an almost maternal care. She made me tea, made sure I ate, and sorted through the endless stream of flowers and sympathy cards. "Dad would have wanted us to take care of you," she'd say, adjusting the blanket on my shoulders. Their presence was a balm on my raw wound. They filled the deafening silence of the house with their voices, their activity. They created a cocoon around me, shielding me from the harsh reality and its ugly, bureaucratic details. I was immensely grateful. They were Richard's children, his flesh and blood, and their care felt like a natural extension of his love. During one of those difficult, sleepless nights, I sat in the living room, flipping through old photo albums. Jessica came in silently and sat beside me. "Can't sleep?" she asked gently. I just shook my head, my gaze falling on a photograph. It was from Thanksgiving, about 8 years ago. Richard and Mark, both in work aprons, were trying to assemble a new smoker in the backyard with serious expressions. Jessica and I were watching them from the kitchen window, laughing and sprinkling cinnamon on an apple pie made from my family recipe. I remember that day, Jessica smiled, pointing at the photo. They spent 3 hours on that thing, and only read the instructions when they were almost done. Dad was so stubborn. But they got it working, I added. The brisket was amazing. That evening, Jessica and I had talked for a long time in the kitchen. She told me about her kids, about the challenges of running her blog, and I shared with her the secrets to a perfect pie crust. It was one of those rare moments when I felt not just like their father's wife, but like her friend, almost a mother figure. Richard had always wanted us to get along. "You two are the most important women in my life," he used to say. "I need you to be a team." And in that moment, we had been. I looked at Jessica, sitting next to me on the sofa, so grown up and caring. "Your father was so proud of you both," I said quietly. "We know," she replied, her voice filled with genuine warmth. "And we're going to do everything to make him proud of us now." Those memories, that quiet nighttime conversation, solidified my trust. I could rely on them. They were family. A week after the funeral, they asked to speak with me. "Evelyn, we need to discuss some formalities," Mark said, as delicately as he could. We sat in the living room. I was in Richard's armchair, which still smelled of his cologne. They were opposite me. Next to them sat a man in a severe suit I didn't recognize. "Evelyn, this is Mr. Henderson," Mark introduced him. He was helping Dad with some legal matters recently. Dad didn't want to burden Mr. Davis. They were friends, after all, and he felt it would be awkward. The explanation seemed plausible. Richard truly disliked mixing business with friendship. "We know this is a difficult time," Jessica began in a soft, gentle voice. "But Dad wanted everything settled as soon as possible. He was worried about the future. Our collective future." Mr. Henderson cleared his throat and placed a thin folder on the coffee table. "Mrs. Summers, your late husband." He revised his final wishes. "He thought a lot about how best to care for his family and not burden you with complex financial decisions at such a trying time." Mark nodded gravely. "He wanted to simplify everything for you, Evelyn. So you wouldn't have to manage assets, deal with investments. He wanted to give you peace of mind." Henderson opened the folder. According to the last will and testament of Mr. Richard Summers, dated March 2nd of this year, all of his business assets, investment portfolios, and real estate, with the exception of this house, are to be divided equally between his children, Mark and Jessica Summers. The words hung in the air. I stared at him, but their meaning wouldn't register. March 2nd? But we were at Davis's office at the end of the month. My mind clung to that detail, but couldn't grasp it. The home you reside in remains yours for your lifetime, Henderson continued, avoiding my eyes. Additionally, a monthly stipend of $3,000 will be disbursed to you from a trust fund to cover living expenses. $3,000. The number pierced through the fog in my mind. I knew what the property taxes on this house were. I knew the cost of insurance, of maintenance. That amount was a mockery. But what about Richard's sister? The trust for Catherine? I whispered, the only question I could form. Mark sighed heavily, his face a mask of what I thought was genuine sorrow. Dad decided that Jessica and I would look after Aunt Catherine personally. He felt family care was better than a formal fund. He trusted us. I mechanically took the copy of the will. The paper was smooth and cold. My eyes scanned the lines, but the words blurred. This wasn't a document. It was a betrayal. But whose? My mind couldn't process it. Richard. My Richard, who always said, Evie, I want you to live like a queen, even if I'm gone. My Richard, who worried I might forget to pay a small bill. Could he have done this? Leave me with a pittance while giving everything to his children? Deprive his own disabled sister of guaranteed care? We know it's a shock, Jessica said softly, seeing my stunned expression. But this is what Dad wanted. He said he wanted to free you from the responsibility. He was afraid you wouldn't be able to handle it all on your own. Free me. Their words, so full of care, now sounded like a verdict. They looked at me, an old, grieving woman, and their sympathy now felt humiliating. Did Richard think I was incompetent? Weak? After everything we'd been through? After all my systems, my order, my professional paranoia that he had so admired? That hurt more than the money. It was the loss of faith in the man I loved. I looked up at them. I didn't see villains. I saw children who had gotten what they wanted and were now trying to comfort me, the poor old widow. And that made it even worse. I need to think, I said quietly, my voice steady. I stood up and walked upstairs to my office, feeling their sympathetic gazes on my back. I closed the door behind me and leaned against it, breathing heavily. The world had turned upside down. I no longer knew what was real. Was my marriage a lie? Was my husband a man I never really knew? Grief mingled with confusion, creating a toxic cocktail that poisoned all my memories. I sat down at my computer, not to search for clues, but for salvation. I was looking for something that would give me my Richard back. An explanation. A justification. Anything. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. And then, like a flash of light, his voice echoed in my memory. His voice from that last morning, from another, happier life. I CC'd you on the email. The subject line is, Final Version, the only one that matters. It wasn't a thought of forgery. It was a desperate hope. A hope that in the digital archive, in the world of order and logic we had built together, I would find his true voice. That he had left me one last message that would explain this nightmare. My heart pounded like a trapped bird. I opened my email client. I looked at the empty search bar. I wasn't looking for a document. I was looking for my husband. Slowly, letter by letter, I began to type. The enter key clicked under my finger with deafening loudness. For a split second, the screen remained blank, and then, at the very top of the list, a single line appeared. An unread email. Sender, Richard Summers. Subject, Final Version, the only one that matters. Time stood still. I stared at that line, and my heart, which had been pounding in panic, suddenly stopped. This was it. The last message in a bottle, cast into the digital ocean hours before he was swept away. I was afraid to open it. Afraid of not finding answers. Or worse, of finding confirmation that he truly had intended to leave me with nothing. With a trembling hand, I moved the cursor over the email and clicked. It opened. The message was short, so typically Richard, no sentiment, just the facts. Evie, here it is. The final version, notarized at Davis's office. Now your inner archivist can sleep soundly. Make sure you save this to our cloud. Love you. R. Below it was a single attachment. Will_Richard_Summers_final_notarized. PDF. I downloaded it to my desktop. The PDF icon appeared next to a folder labeled Utilities. It looked so mundane, so out of place in the chaos. I double-clicked it. The document opened. I scanned the first page. The name, the address, and the date. A date that made me gasp for air. March 28th, 26 days after the version Mark and Jessica had shown me. I read on, tears blurring my vision and dripping onto the keyboard. Everything was in its place. The house and the main savings account to me. The assets, divided between Mark and Jessica, but with a clear stipulation that it was a gift, not an entitlement. And the trust fund. A separate, protected trust for his sister, Catherine, with the detailed care instructions we had drafted together. This was my husband's voice. Every word, every comma was his. This was his care, his love, his order. He hadn't betrayed me. In that moment, I wasn't thinking about Mark or Jessica. I wasn't thinking about the money. I pressed my hand to the monitor, as if I could touch him. The wave of relief was so powerful my legs felt weak. He hadn't abandoned me. My Richard, my anchor, was with me. This document wasn't just paper. It was his digital ghost, come to tell me I wasn't crazy, that our love had been real. I rested my head on the desk and sobbed for the first time, not from the grief of loss, but from the joy of rediscovery. The crying subsided, leaving behind a ringing emptiness and a cold knot in my stomach. The emotion receded, replaced by the icy, ruthless logic of an archivist. I opened the document again. On the last page was a digital notary signature and the seal of the state of North Carolina. I zoomed in. Every pixel was sharp. It was authentic. And if this was authentic, then what was theirs? I stood up and went to the dresser where I'd left the folder Henderson had given me. I took out the pages and placed them next to my keyboard. I looked at them with new eyes now. Not as a grieving widow, but as a documentation expert. The differences were glaring, once you knew where to look. The paper. Their version was printed on bright white, glossy paper you could buy at any office supply store. Richard always used a cream-colored, matte bond paper for important documents. The font. As I'd noticed, the font was different. A modern typeface with perfect kerning. Richard's old computer used a standard Times New Roman that had its own subtle, recognizable footprint. The signature. I compared the signature on their document to the one on Richard's driver's license in my wallet. It was close. Very close. But it had no life. It lacked the tiny, almost imperceptible flourish at the end of the letter D that Richard always made. It was a skilled but dead copy. And, of course, the date. March 2nd. Why would he sign a will on March 2nd, only to have a completely different version notarized with our longtime lawyer on the 28th? The memories of the past few days began to reassemble in my mind. Their care. Their suffocating kindness. The way Mark took over all the phone calls, so I wouldn't have to worry. He didn't want me talking to Davis. The way Jessica was constantly at my side, bringing me tea, covering me with a blanket. She wasn't caring for me. She was watching me. They weren't shielding me from bureaucracy. They were isolating me. A sudden chill ran down my spine. I wasn't just a victim of a tragedy. I was the target of a carefully planned operation. I had to go downstairs. I had to play my part. I splashed cold water on my face and looked at my reflection. Puffy red eyes. A pale face. I looked exactly as a woman in my position should look. The perfect disguise. I put the printout of the fake will back in its folder and put my laptop to sleep. I didn't close anything. If they decided to check, they'd only see a blank desktop. The real document, the digital ghost, no longer lived on the computer. It lived in my head. When I came downstairs, they were in the living room, talking quietly. They fell silent the moment they saw me. "Evelyn, how are you?" Jessica jumped up and came to me, peering at my face with exaggerated concern. I'm okay." My voice was weak and broken. It wasn't hard to act. Part of me truly was crushed. It's just so hard to process. that Richard decided all this. I saw them exchange a quick, almost imperceptible glance. A look of relief. "We understand," Mark said in his deep voice. "Dad just wanted what was best. He loved you very much, Evelyn. And he trusted us to take care of you." "Yes, take care of me," I repeated, lowering my eyes. I sat in the armchair, feeling like an actress on a stage. Every word they said, every gesture, now had a double meaning. I watched them, analyzed them, logged the data in my mental archive. Mark kept checking his phone, typing quickly and hiding it when I turned my head. Jessica fussed around me, offering water, another blanket. Her touches, which had felt like a comfort just yesterday, now felt cold. That evening, as we ate leftover casserole brought by a neighbor, I decided to run my first test. "I was just thinking," I began, slowly picking at my food. "Richard mentioned he'd been working with a new lawyer. Henderson? I just can't recall him ever talking about him before. Had he been working with him long?" I asked the question to the room, not looking at anyone in particular. There was a brief pause. Too brief for a normal conversation, but long enough for me. "Oh yeah, for a while now," Mark answered quickly, not looking up from his plate. "The last 6 months, probably. Dad didn't want to bother you with the details. Said it was just technical stuff for the business." "Yes, that's right, 6 months," Jessica echoed, smiling nervously. "He was very happy with Mr. Henderson. Said he was very efficient." They were lying. Clumsily, but in unison. And that synchronicity was more telling than any words. They had rehearsed. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in our huge bed, breathing in the scent of Richard that lingered on his pillow, and I made a plan. The grief hadn't vanished, but now, beneath it, a solid foundation of anger had formed. It was a cold, clear anger. The anger of an archivist who discovers a forgery has been planted in her perfect system. I couldn't just march out and declare, "I have the real will and you're frauds." They would deny everything. They'd say I was in shock, that I'd forged it myself. They had their lawyer, their story. I needed more than a PDF file. I needed irrefutable proof. I needed a strategy. Step 1. Contact Mr. Davis. I had to do it in a way that wouldn't arouse Mark and Jessica's suspicion. Step 2. Secure the original. I got up, turned on my laptop, and, following Richard's instructions, uploaded the notarized PDF to our secure cloud storage. Then I copied it to an encrypted flash drive I always carried. Finally, I sent it from an anonymous email account to my work email, which they didn't know about. 3 backups in 3 different locations. My paranoia was finally paying off. Step 3. Gather more information. I needed to understand their motive. Was it just greed? Or was there something more? I felt my old professional instincts kicking in. Decades spent in corporate warfare, where information was a weapon and a properly filed document could decide the fate of a multi-million-dollar deal. They thought I was a weak, old woman. They had no idea who they were dealing with. The next morning, I said I needed to go to the pharmacy. "I'll go with you." Jessica immediately volunteered. "No, sweetie, you don't have to," I smiled gently. "I need to be alone for a little while, get some air. I'll just take a drive." She didn't insist, but I saw a flicker of doubt in her eyes. I took my purse, my car keys, and left. But I didn't drive to the pharmacy. I drove to a nearby park, parked in the farthest corner, and pulled out my phone. I found Mr. Davis's number in my contacts. My fingers hovered over the call button. What if Mark was right? What if Richard really did change lawyers, and I just didn't know? Doubt is a treacherous thing. It seeps into the most solid convictions. I took a deep breath and pressed call. "Davis and Partners," a cheerful voice answered. "Hello, may I speak with Mr. Davis? This is Evelyn Summers." A few seconds later, his familiar, slightly gravelly voice came on the line. "Evelyn. My goodness, I've called you several times. Please accept my deepest condolences. Richard was a good friend. I still can't believe it." "Thank you, Frank," I replied, his genuine sympathy nearly bringing me to tears again. "I'm calling about a delicate matter. I'm a bit confused about the paperwork." "Of course, how can I help?" I forced my voice to be even and calm. "Mark told me that Richard had hired another attorney recently to handle his affairs. A Mr. Henderson. Do you know anything about him? There was a silence on the other end of the line. Henderson, Davis repeated. His tone had changed, become wary. I've never heard the name. Evelyn, Richard, and I finalized his will less than a month ago. He was in my office on March 28th. We signed everything, had it notarized. He was absolutely certain about his decision. He said he was going to email you a copy. My heart sank and soared at the same time. This was it. Confirmation. Frank, I lowered my voice to a whisper, though I was alone in the car. I was shown a different will, dated March 2nd. Signed by this Henderson. And in it, everything is different. I heard Davis sigh heavily. Evelyn, he said, slowly and clearly. Don't say anything to anyone. Don't let on that you know. And please, come to my office tomorrow morning. 10 o'clock. And bring everything you have. Both versions. And not a word of this conversation to anyone. Do you understand? Yes, I whispered. Good. We'll get to the bottom of this, Evelyn. I promise you. I ended the call. The fog in my head had finally cleared. Before me was a sharp, clear picture. And it was ugly. Driving home, I was no longer a victim. I was an architect. The architect of a plan that would restore not only my inheritance, but my husband's honor. I knew a simple legal challenge wouldn't be enough. Mark and Jessica would hold their ground. Henderson would cover for them. They would turn it into a messy family feud, painting me as a greedy stepmother contesting the final wishes of their beloved father. They would play for sympathy, using my age and my grief against me. No, I would not play by their rules. I would create my own. My plan began to take shape. It wasn't about a frontal assault. It was about planting an information bomb under their lies and letting them press the detonator themselves. I needed to catch them in a lie. Not just one, but several. I needed to document it. To build a chain of inconsistencies that would make their story crumble like a house of cards. That evening, I decided to set the bait. We were sitting in the living room again. The atmosphere was tense. My silence, which they had first taken for grief, now seemed to unnerve them. I looked up from the book I was pretending to read. You know, I was just remembering, I began in a quiet, wistful voice. When your father and I were discussing the will with Frank Davis, we talked about one little thing. Richard really wanted his collection of antique maps to go to Mark's oldest son, Jason. He said it would help him with his history lessons. It was such a sentimental detail. I was just trying to remember, was that in the version Mr. Henderson prepared? I don't recall seeing it. I watched them. My gaze was soft, misty, full of sorrow. But behind that mask, I was a scanner, recording every microsecond of their reaction. Jessica blinked, confused. She clearly didn't know what to say. She looked at Mark for a lifeline. Mark frowned, putting on a show of deep thought. The maps, he drew the word out. Yeah, I think there was something about that. Henderson probably just structured it differently. As part of the general estate that passes to us, and then we'll give them to Jason. Dad wanted to simplify, you know? So there weren't too many small items. He spoke with confidence, but his eyes darted around. He had taken the bait. The map collection. It was a little fiction Richard and I had invented. He never had one. I had made it up 5 minutes ago. And they had just confirmed its existence in a will that never was. I nodded slowly, as if accepting his explanation. Yes. I suppose so. To simplify. Of course. I lowered my eyes back to my book, but I didn't see the words. I saw a crack in their armor. It was small, but it was there. And I knew exactly where to strike next. Later, after they had gone to their rooms, I sat alone in the dark living room. The house was quiet. But to me, it was filled with the echoes of their lies. I no longer felt weak. The grief had transformed into a cold, focused energy. They had underestimated me. They saw me as an appendage to their father, an old woman who could be easily deceived and cast aside. They forgot who I was. For 40 years, I had built and defended the archives of one of the world's largest financial corporations. I had seen lies in documents and reports in people's eyes. I knew how the system worked. They hid the updated will. But I found the cloud backup. They thought that was the end of the story. For me, it was only the beginning. They thought I was just an old, grieving woman. They didn't know I was an archivist. And an archivist never loses a battle over documents. Even when it seemed like all was lost, I didn't give up. The next part of the story will show everyone's true colors. Frank Davis's office was the antithesis of modern, sterile design. The walls were paneled in dark mahogany, and the air smelled of old books and leather bindings. It was the sanctuary of a man for whom the law was not just a business, but a craft. I sat in a deep leather armchair across from his massive desk. Between us lay two documents, my printout and their glossy forgery. Frank studied both specimens in silence, using a magnifying glass. "It's a fake," he finally said, pushing the forgery away with a hint of disgust. "And a pretty clumsy one if you know what to look for. But unfortunately, Evelyn, a probate judge doesn't sit with a magnifying glass. He sees two documents and two conflicting parties. And one of those parties is the blood relatives." He leaned back in his chair. "They'll claim Richard had a change of heart, that he had a falling out with me and hired a new lawyer. They'll say your PDF is an old draft you're trying to pass off as the final version. They'll paint you as a grieving, confused woman. Believe me, I've seen this dozens of times. They'll turn you into the greedy stepmother." Every word was a blow. "But I have proof," I argued, my voice cracking. "The email from Richard, which their IT expert will call a fabrication," Frank countered calmly. "Evelyn, you have to understand, we're not entering a legal dispute. We're entering a war of reputations. They've built an entire alternate reality. To tear it down, we need more than just doubt. We need an irrefutable, absolute smoking gun. We need the entire archive." I felt a wave of despair rise in my throat. "But what do we do?" Frank leaned forward, a fighter's glint in his eyes. "You spent 40 years at Bank of America building data protection systems. You know the value of information better than anyone. So you're going to go home, put on your grieving widow mask, and start thinking like an archivist. Find everything. Every little thing. Every inconsistency. I'll start digging on my end." I returned to a house that was no longer my fortress. It was enemy territory. Mark and Jessica were flawless in their roles as caring children. Their presence was a constant pressure. I felt like I was under a microscope. The investigation began with Mr. Henderson. A search of the North Carolina State Bar Registry yielded nothing. But, following Frank's advice, I dug deeper. I spent several nights scouring legal forums and case databases. Finally, I found him. Arthur Henderson, an attorney from Florida. Not disbarred, but actively practicing. And with a very specific reputation. Over the last decade, complaints had been filed against him by elderly clients in probate cases. They were all dismissed for lack of evidence, but the pattern was identical: a sudden, updated will favoring distant relatives or caregivers, always involving an out-of-state notary. He wasn't just a fraud, he was a professional predator. Next was the notary Brenda J. McKinley. A search of the public registry confirmed her name. She was real. That was a blow. It meant she was complicit. I found her business address, a small suite in an office park on the edge of town. One afternoon, after telling them I was going to a grief support group, I drove there. The office was empty. A for lease sign hung on the door. I spoke to the security guard in the lobby. "Oh, Brenda," he said. "She cleared out about a month ago. Left in a real hurry. Said she was moving to Oregon to take care of her sick mother." Oregon. The other side of the country. They were covering their tracks. A jolt of panic shot through me. They were steps ahead. I got back in my car and just sat there, staring into space as tears streamed down my face. Maybe Frank is right. Maybe I'll lose. The thought that these people were desecrating not only my life, but Richard's memory was unbearable. I slammed my fist on the steering wheel, the jolt of pain bringing me back. No, I will not give up. My last hope was Richard's office. But the next morning, Mark launched a preemptive strike. "Evelyn," he said at breakfast, his face a mask of concern. I was thinking, Dad's work laptop, there's a lot of important information on there about his old projects. I think I'll take it with me, just to make sure nothing gets accidentally erased. I'll back it up and bring it right back. My heart sank. He was taking the main piece of evidence. I couldn't object without revealing myself. Yes, of course, That's a good idea, I stammered, feeling the ground crumble beneath me. That evening, when I walked into the empty office, despair washed over me. I sat at his desk and buried my head in my hands. It was over. They'd won. Then my eyes fell on a bookshelf. There, tucked between thick engineering textbooks, was a slim, leather-bound notebook. Richard had kept it for years, jotting down ideas, calculations, and sometimes passwords. He never trusted password managers, calling them digital skeleton keys for thieves. I frantically flipped through the pages. And on the last one, I found it. A note in his familiar handwriting, Carbonite. Total insurance against entropy. For my EV. Carbonite. The cloud service that creates a mirror image of an entire hard drive. I had convinced him to install it myself. I found the login and password. With trembling hands, I typed them into my own laptop. Before me, a digital replica of Richard's computer materialized, synced to an hour before his death. I found more than just the emails with Mark. I found a folder labeled Personal. Inside was a single audio file. I clicked play, and I heard Richard's voice. It was a voice memo, something he'd obviously dictated to himself. Spoke with Mark again today. It's heartbreaking. He's in so much trouble, but he won't listen. Demanding money, making threats. Says I owe him. Why can't he see I'm just trying to help him, not enable him? I told him he won't get a dime for his schemes. He was furious. I'm afraid he's going to do something stupid. I need to talk to Jessica. Maybe she can get through to him. The recording cut off. But it wasn't just a motive. It was proof of a direct conflict days before the fake will was supposedly signed. It was my husband's voice from the grave, crying out for justice. 2 weeks later, they made their move. A courier delivered an official notice from the court. They had filed the will for probate. The letter also contained a demand from Henderson to be granted full access to the house for an appraisal of assets. It wasn't an eviction notice. Under their own fake will, I had lifetime rights to the house. This was worse. This was humiliation. It was an act of dominance, a declaration of who is now in charge of the home I had shared with my husband. Jessica brought me the letter, her face a picture of sympathy. Evelyn, it's just a formality. We have to follow the procedure. In that moment, I almost broke. I wanted to shove the printouts of her brother's emails in her face, to play her the recording of her father's voice. But I held back. I looked at her with my most grief-stricken expression and whispered, I understand. The next day, the appraisers came. They walked through the rooms, taking pictures of every item that held a memory of my life with Richard. I sat in the kitchen, listening to their footsteps overhead, feeling like a prisoner. That evening, I called Frank, ready to surrender. I can't do this anymore, Frank, I sobbed into the phone. They've won. No, he said, his voice firm. They've made a mistake. They've gotten arrogant. They think you're broken. Let them. Now you pull yourself together. The real fight is just beginning. The courtroom was a battlefield. Henderson was a brilliant performer. He painted a picture of me as a manipulative schemer, trying to cheat the poor orphans out of their rightful inheritance. He presented testimony from neighbors to whom Jessica had been complaining for weeks about how I was a bad influence on her father. He even brought in some financial advisor who claimed Richard's business assets were in a dire state, and his decision to turn them over to his investment-savvy son was the only logical choice. The judge, a woman with a weary face, was clearly leaning their way. Every time Frank tried to present my evidence, Henderson would leap up with an objection, and the judge would sustain it. I could see the triumphant smirk on Mark's face. Then Frank played his hand. Your Honor, I'd like to ask the petitioner, Mr. Mark Summers, a question. Mr. Summers, you confirm you were aware of all your father's final wishes? Yes, of course, Mark answered confidently. Including the sentimental provision to leave his antique map collection to your son, Jason? Mark hesitated for a fraction of a second, then nodded firmly. Yes. Dad loved Jason very much. He wanted him to have the collection. The only problem, Your Honor, Frank said, pausing for effect, is that Richard Summers never had a map collection. It's a fiction. A fiction my client mentioned in a private conversation with the petitioners to test their reaction. And they have just lied about it under oath. It was a knockout blow. Jessica let out a small gasp. The color drained from Mark's face, leaving a mask of horror. But that's not all, Frank continued, pressing his advantage. My opponent claims Mr. Summers wanted to hand over his assets to his experienced son. But we have evidence of what the deceased actually thought of his son's business acumen. He played the audio file. Richard's voice, full of pain and disappointment, filled the dead-silent courtroom. When it was over, Frank placed a flash drive on the judge's bench. On here is a complete backup of the deceased's hard drive, including emails that prove Mr. Mark Summers was on the verge of bankruptcy and was blackmailing his own father. That, Your Honor, is the true motive for this monstrous fraud. The judge's ruling was swift and merciless. The case was referred to the district attorney's office for charges of fraud, perjury, and forgery. I walked out of the courthouse into the bright sunlight. I had won, but I felt no triumph. Only a vast, hollow emptiness. The following months were a blur. To avoid prison time, Mark and Jessica took a plea bargain. They were facing crippling fines and public ruin. My husband's family was destroyed. I was alone in the big, quiet house. I had restored Richard's honor, but the cost of victory felt unbearable. One evening, sorting through Richard's papers, I found an old journal. On one page, he had written, "The greatest tragedy is knowledge not shared." The words struck me. I had one because I had knowledge, skills I'd honed over 40 years at Bank of America. But how many others in my position would have simply given up? How many would have believed the lies because they didn't know how to find the truth in this new digital world? And then I knew what I had to do. I found my new purpose. I sold the large house, now too full of ghosts. I bought a small, comfortable condo downtown. And I invested a significant portion of the remaining money into creating a foundation, the Evelyn Archive. It wasn't a charity. It was an educational trust. We built an online platform where top lawyers, financial advisors, and IT specialists held free webinars for senior citizens. We taught them the basics of digital hygiene, how to create strong passwords, spot phishing emails, use cloud storage. We explained digital estate planning, the importance of notarized documents, and why you should always have a backup. I taught one of the courses myself, Think Like an Archivist, how to organize your digital life. I told my story, without names, without the sordid details. I presented it as a case study, an example of how vulnerable we can be and how powerful knowledge can make us. I was no longer a victim. I wasn't an avenger. I was an archivist again. But now I wasn't protecting corporate secrets. I was preserving and sharing knowledge that could save others from the pain and betrayal I had endured. My personal archive was filled with bitterness. But the new one I was building was filled with hope. And that was the most valuable inheritance of all.